My name is Zach Powers. I am the Director of Communications at the Writers Center, and I just want to welcome you to the Writers Center's virtual Craft Chat series. And this is where we talk with writers a little less about what they wrote and a little bit more about how they wrote it. I am also a fiction writer and a novelist, and so that's why I am here today welcoming our guest, Elizabeth Gonzalez James, who has written Mona at Sea, this wonderful, wonderful book. And there'll be a link posted in a moment where you can go find a way to buy a copy of this book. And everyone hopefully visiting us today on the chat will do just that. Elizabeth, welcome. Thank you so much for joining us. And to get started, I would like to just ask you to read a brief excerpt from the book if you've got a copy handy.
Yes, I do. Thank you so much for having me. So I'm just going to read a short little thing. This is from the first chapter. It's Mona has decided to keep a diary. And so this is her first diary entry. Chapter 1, I am born. My mother's parents didn't come to her wedding, couldn't endure the shame of seeing their Irish rose joined to a Mexican American with skin the color of a pecan shell. Within a year, my parents had me, and a year after, they had Danny. I think my mother hastily made 2 new family members to replace the ones she'd lost. I grew up hearing the story, how love had bested hate, but eventually I learned the unsaid kernel deep inside the tale. The one that caused me for years to look at mirrors quickly and always at a slant, was that I now carried something inside of me that might cause others, even my own family, to turn away. I remember the year I learned the sun was going to explode. My mother had an astronomy book that lived on the coffee table, and the back inside cover had full color illustrations of the final stages of the sun, from yellow ball to angry giant to dead, silent dwarf. I imagined all consuming heat scorching everything on earth and the forever night that would follow. I had nightmares about fireballs, melting trees, a gloom swallowing every sound. My mother hid the astronomy book in the attic and enrolled me in a few after-school classes at the Y. By second grade, we had a day planner in which I could see my future meted out in 15-minute increments. All those little blocks, equally sized and neatly labeled, made me feel secure, confident, always know ahead. When you're told over and over what a smart kid you in every science fair, every essay contest, it doesn't just go to your head, it defines you. I defined me. I became what people said I was, a winner, a genius, a singular talent. Who's an abstract concept like infinity or world peace. I could think about it, but to see it or live it, that wouldn't compute. My middle name is Lisa after my mother's mother, and Mona was tacked on, I assume, in a half-cocked bid to align with greatness. I don't know what my parents were playing at, naming me after the most famous painting in the world, but if timeless beauty and silent grace are the summits I'm meant to reach, God knows they picked wrong. I'm a one-hit wonder, then nothing, nothing, like the lady with the mystic smile. Thank you.
Thank you so much. That was great. And I'm glad you chose that's a good little bit of intro to the book as a whole. So
Yeah.
so we've introed the book as a whole. Can you just let us know, besides being the author of this wonderful novel, who are you?
Who am I? Yeah, I am a geriatric millennial, which I have just learned. I used to call myself an elder millennial. Um, and I didn't intend on becoming a writer. I got an MBA in 2007, 2008. I thought I was going to um, be like a finance person, and I couldn't get a job because of the Great Recession, and I got pregnant and I started writing, and 10 years later here I am. So yeah.
Great. So the first question we like to ask our guests is sometimes maybe the toughest one, so let's get it out of the way. What's something you do in your writing or as a writer that people don't seem to notice? Maybe some element of craft that you pay attention to, particular attention to, and you'd like to talk about maybe, but nobody ever brings up.
Yeah, my favorite thing to do when I'm writing is to kind of do the establishing shot to build a scene by literally like pulling the camera back and doing a long pan over the landscape and imbuing it with mood and all that kind of stuff. I mean, if I could write a story that was just like an establishing shot, if I could find a way to make that interesting, I would totally do that. And I think that those shots are in the book. I keep calling it a shot because in my head, when I write, I see the movie that I'm kind of trying to create, and so in my head, it's very visual. I think those are so important because they set up the whole stage. The curtain opens, and this is where we find ourselves in a room or in a landscape or whatever it is. And yeah, I think that I'm really good at that. I think I'm really good at establishing where we are and what the emotional tone is going to be for what comes next. And yeah, I
That,
never get to talk about that.
that's really interesting. Maybe we can come back to it some, because now that you mentioned the making the movie in your mind, which is like, as soon as you said, like, absolutely, this book definitely has that cinematic quality. Like, you absolutely have it. Yeah, there's I can easily see how this converts into the filmic or video
Mhm.
or whatever format. So yeah, that's a really interesting point that you now that you say it, my brain is going back through different scenes and like, oh yeah, that one too, that one too. So that's really great. But I wanted to start with tone, because as much as the scenes are set really, really well and stand alone as really strong scenic writing, the tone was really interested. And one of the reasons we were talking about the geriatric millennialness and whatnot, one of the things when I was reading this novel was I had the thought, this is a Gen X novel for millennials. And what I meant by that was there's certainly kind of the trademark snark of Gen X, I believe, of your narrator, Mona. But then also dealing with someone who is dealing with becoming an adult during the financial crisis in the late 2000s. So fully millennial at that point. It's the tone sort of reminded me of my youngest days, and then the content was of my 20 somethings when all this was going down. Um, so first, broadly, let's just get a framework for what we're talking about. How would you describe tone, sort of in your own words? What is tone to you?
Yeah. So I think that tone, to me, when people talk about tone, I hear like tone of voice. So it's not what's said, I guess, but the way in which it's said, and that ties in very much to language, and voice. Um, yeah, I don't know if that's like the right definition though, because I don't have an MFA, so I don't, you know, I don't necessarily know what I'm talking about, but
None of us do. It's the dirty secret. Right? I mean, is there is that something you think about at all? I mean, do you think about the way it sounds? Is that something, like, in your first draft to your revision, is that something you're trying to make stronger? Was Mona's voice sort of did Mona's voice flow out of you naturally in a first draft, or was that something you tweaked and tweaked until she had the right bite to her wit and her observations?
So, well, I'll start off. You asked, is that something I think about? It is, but not until later drafts. I think that's like a one of the very last pass things that you should that I think that's for me. That's one of the very last elements. Um, so Mona's voice came out pretty much as is, and I don't. The book is like very loosely semi-autobiographical. I don't want to like get into this whole thing of like how much of this is my own story, but I also went through a long period of unemployment. Mona went through a long period of unemployment. And when I got out of that, I was really angry and I had a lot to say about it. And I actually used to keep a blog in 2009, which I've since removed from the internet, so no one can find it. But it was just these really angry screeds about how Wall Street had failed and how the government had failed to deal with what this mess that Wall Street had created, etc. And then when I started writing Mona in 2011, I think I was definitely still holding on to a lot of that anger. And her voice was just my voice initially. And all the bones that I had to pick about the financial crisis. And when I finished writing it, my husband's my first reader. When I finished the rough draft, my husband was like, "Oh my God, you have to bring it so far down." He's like, "This is like on a scale of 1 to 10 in terms of how angry she is, she's like a 30." And so I brought it down. And then subsequent readers were like, no, you still got to bring it way down. And it was just a process over the 10 years that it took me to get it published, of everybody being like, she's a little much. You should bring her down. So yeah, so that's her voice has been subdued a lot over the years.
So that's interesting. So you were obviously this drew something from the blogs you mentioned, that type of tone. How much of Mona's voice is your own internal natural voice, and how much was sort of maybe in especially those early drafts an inflation of that, or let your internal voice run wild and not unrestrained?
Yeah, I kind of think of it as like the angel and the devil on your shoulder. I just think she's like the devil voice. She's me times 10, in my most cynical, least charitable self. And also she's 23. I mean, nobody like is that very few people, I think, when they're 23 are that empathetic or non-judgmental, and so she's also just young. She's a young person who just doesn't know that much. And so um I think that I probably did resemble her a lot more at 23 than I do at 39. I hope that I've learned to be more mature and less reactionary.
Yeah, that's great. So just sticking with one last question on tone, what advice would you give a newer writer working on a tone-centric story, a story that really relies on the voice of the narrator? It's usually first person, not always, but the voice of the narrator.
Yeah, I would the advice I would give is probably just think about what kind of emotional atmosphere you want the story to have. I mean, this book is takes place in a desert, a literal and a metaphoric desert. She lives in Tucson, and she's just in a place where her soul cannot flourish at all. And so people have described her tone as dry, and maybe that was intentional, maybe it just happened, I don't know. But I would look to the story first and just see what the story requires. I don't think tone is something you can superimpose. I think it's just something that you can that is already there, that you can choose to bring out in subsequent drafts. It would be difficult, I think, for me to conceive of a story where tone leads. Um, yeah.
Okay, that's great. I do want to do one quick aside based on something you mentioned. So you started this novel in 2011, you said, and so just that's a 10-year process
Mhm.
of first word to publication. Uh, uh, how did that go? Do you have any like words of encouragement for people working on long projects? That's long project doesn't always just mean the length of the project itself. It means the length of time you have to invest in it.
Yeah, absolutely. I mentioned I don't have an MFA. So I had the idea to write this book in 2011. And I just sat down and started writing. And I I didn't know anything about how to write a book. I knew how to write, but I didn't know how to tell a story. And so the early years were spent taking this kind of word vomit that I had dumped all over the page and turning it into a coherent story, learning how to build out character, plot, raising the stakes, all of that stuff. I finished it in 2015 and I sent it out to agents. I got an agent right away. I was super excited. And my agent started sending it out to publishers, and it went out to between 40 and 45 publishers, and everybody loved it and nobody picked it up. And the feedback we got was, it's hilarious, it's well written, we don't know how to market it. And um, but they also said, write another book and let us know when that book is done. So I was devastated, obviously, but I chose to focus on the fact that they said it was hilarious and well written and they wanted to see a second book. So I did start writing a second book. And from 2016 until 2019, that's all I did. I just focused on book number 2. I put Mona in a drawer for the most part. I would send it out every now and again to small presses and contests. In 2019, Santa Fe Writers Project had their annual literary awards, and I sent it in thinking maybe I would get an honorable mention or something. I didn't have any expectations of anything. And to my utter shock, I became a finalist and they offered me a contract for publication. And by that point, I had walked away from it. I had moved on. I was already working on book 2. And this one was the book that I failed, that this was my failure book. And so I had to talk myself into getting back into the draft. Now they put me with an incredible editor, Nicole Catherine Schmidt, and she really helped bring the manuscript to a whole different level. Um, but and then it took 2 years for the editing and getting the book ready and everything, and now it's out. And my takeaway though from that process is that the worst thing that can happen to you when you write a book is that you finish it and then it doesn't get published. And that happened to me. I lived through it, and I'm really thankful for having experienced that failure, because now I already know as a writer that I've lived through the worst thing that can happen, and the sun still came up and I still wrote another book and it was okay. And I actually I'm not afraid anymore of failing because I did. And it's a wonderful feeling, kind of. I'm very, very grateful for it.
You mentioned one thing I wanted to comment on too, which was publishers saying they didn't know how to market a book. And another dirty secret of publishing is that most publishers don't know how to market any book. They have a few strategies that work for certain books, but it's very limited, and it's not a big precise system where they just have absolute knowledge of what they're doing. No, it's not that at all. And the success or failure of a book is almost entirely contingent on the marketing of the publisher. And unless you are a famous person already, unless you are already famous when you write, the success of a book relies almost entirely on the publisher. And they don't really always have such a great idea of what to do with every book they get published. And I would say too that Santa Fe is a great publisher, and they work really hard with their titles to get them out and in front of people. So that's a great it's a great independent press that's one of their focuses. So I mean,
yeah, absolutely. And I would also say that to the publishers not knowing how to market a book, I mean, if there was a formula for having a successful book, every book would be successful, but there isn't. Every book is different. Every climate into which a book is released is different. Every author is different. It's just, it's tricky. And but yeah, like I said, I'm just really, really grateful that things worked out the way they did, and I'm really happy to have published with Santa Fe Writers Project. I think they were absolutely the right press.
Yeah, absolutely. So we have one question in from the chat, which is a straightforward one. So we'll start with that, with our chat questions. To everyone else, if you have questions, please put them in the chat and we'll get to them. How did you select the title?
Yeah, the title was inspired by a song by Jamie Cullum. He's a British singer-songwriter. His song is called All at Sea. And in the song, the narrator is happy to be all at sea. When you're all at sea, typically it means that you're adrift and you don't know where to go or what to do, and it's an uncomfortable, bad feeling. But in this song, he's enjoying the chaos. He's enjoying not having any kind of direction, and he's just sort of being with himself. And I liked that conceit because Mona is completely adrift. She is at sea, in the sense that she's like a cork bobbing on the waves and just being buffeted by different circumstances. However, I think that she has to live inside of that chaos and survive it in order to get to a place where she can direct her life. And so for me, that phrase, being all at sea, really summed up the good and the bad of that experience.
I just had a follow-up question to the previous line of questioning that just popped into my head. Whenever I get edited, I feel like I learn something from the way the editor sees stories. And so you mentioned a couple times you didn't have the formal MFA program, which is, not a necessary thing to be a writer, but how was that your first real formal editorial? You had an agent, I guess, maybe some editorial process there, and then with the editor at Santa Fe Writers Project. Was that an educational experience? Is that something, did you learn things while being edited that you're pulling into not just working on this one manuscript, but concepts of writing that you now apply to this new project that you've been working on as well?
Yeah, absolutely. One thing that my editor was really good at was um, I think that I had some scenes that didn't end on exactly the right emotional note. You know, I don't know exactly how one would want to trace the arc, because I don't want to say that every scene should kind of go, like this or something. But I think I had some scenes where maybe it was like this and then and then uh and she was really good at smoothing that out and saying like, no, this emotional reaction should should not be here. It should be moved elsewhere, or we need to smooth this out because it's kind of going zigzagging all over the place, and we want a more smooth transition. And so that was really helpful. I was not able to see, I think, the shape of the scenes.
Mhm. I mean, the scenes do have really good shapes in there, and I do feel
Thank
like,
you.
I mean, it's a good editorial process, but I also feel I definitely attribute some of that to you too, because like the scenes have really just, I mean, there's almost an I don't say episodic, but like prestige TV drama style where you have like sort of
Mm.
each chapter has its own self-enclosed, really good feel. You could take any of those and read them alone and have a positive experience, and that is a talent that not a lot of authors put on the page sometimes. So
Oh, thank you.
yeah. So we talked about tone, and related to tone closely is language. And there's one particular aspect of language I'd like to bring up, and that's language specific to your narrator's experience. I I once heard a talk by the author Ben Percy. He just had a new novel come out, a science fiction novel, which is doing really well. But he started writing lit fic, sort of got into genre fiction. He writes Wolverine for Marvel Comics right now, I think. Anyway, he's bounced around, but he's uh, his entire lecture, a full hour-long lecture, was on giving your characters a job,
Hmm.
because people spend most of their time in their jobs, and that influences the way they think, they talk, and the way they view things. And in Mona's case, this financial background that she has, that she was expecting to go into the world of finance, um, she falls back on that language and the thought processes of that throughout the novel, but especially at the end of a chapter called Sunk Costs. So even a chapter title that relates to the world of finance, like maybe the biggest self-realization she experiences in the book at the end of that chapter is completely rooted in the language of her financial background. So my question is, in creating this character, how did you go about so effectively bringing in this background? Was finance, I mean, you said you had an MBA, which I did not know when I wrote this question. So there was some personal experience, but also was there research involved in preparing for this?
Yeah. Yeah, so I did mention that I have an MBA, and when I first started writing it in 2011, a lot of those like business school buzzword kind of things were still very fresh in my mind. I think she name drops Black Scholes modeling or something, which is something that I remember learning about in when I was taking finance classes. And as I got further and further away from business school, I could not rely anymore on my memory and just had to go to Wikipedia. But yeah, she's a very analytical person, and she would absolutely, I think, try to view her life in terms of like, what's the marginal benefit to this um thing that I'm considering doing. Yeah, what are the sunk costs, etc. And I kind of love that. And I didn't think about it in terms of what you said about giving characters a job. But yeah, when a character has a profession that they're really, really invested in, they're going to bring that particular argot into every aspect of their life. And I think for a lot of people, it's even going to shape how they think. I have a friend who's an incredible chef, and she's also a poet. And we were talking about story revisions, and she was like, well, what flavor does your story have right now? You know, does it need a little more salty, a little more sweet? And I was like, oh my God, I never thought about it in those terms. But of course, like a chef would think about writing in those ways, the same way that you would build a soup. You build a successful poem. You need a little acid, you need a little salt, you need something, a fat, you know, and you can put that metaphor to whatever, you know, whatever you think the fat is in a story. But yeah, I think that's fascinating. And it's it's really fun too to stretch these metaphors, right? Like, I also had a thing in here about fractals. Of course, uh Mona would be interested in fractals, and you know, like how they apply to market movements and stuff like that. And I I I think it's really cool when you can incorporate these different ways of seeing the world around you and put them into your fiction. I don't know. It's very fun for me.
So is that something that happens in draft one, or is that something too that as you're revising, you recognize more opportunities or greater opportunities to pull that in?
Yeah, that was several drafts in for sure. Yeah, draft one, I don't think I could have put any of that in. It's also difficult for me to even just remember draft one because this is like first term Obama years. Like, it was a long time ago. But definitely subsequent drafts. Yeah, that's a thing for like draft 3, 4.
So broadly, in focusing on the language aspect, like what's the benefit for a writer who taps into technical or specialized language? Do you find like a sense of poetry in the language that you like in the Wikipedia articles on finance? Is there some sort of poetry that you can draw from, that you can pull into your own writing that isn't usually used by other authors?
Yeah, for sure the financial stuff. I mean, it just happened to be a subject area where I had a little bit of knowledge at the time. And of course, it's not it's not something I think that a lot of other professional writers know a lot about. And so, yeah, I definitely used it, I think, to differentiate my book and my character and myself as an author. Um, and again, it's fascinating to me the way that people can look at an experience and describe it using such wildly dissimilar language, depending on if you're coming to it as an economist, as a musician, as a chef, you know, whatever. I see it as a vehicle through which to just expand metaphors.
Mm, that's interesting. Is it a technique that not necessarily finance specifically, but are you using sort of any similar techniques in your project you're working on now, or is it something you would return to in a future project deliberately to have as a resource?
I am trying to think. I don't know that I'm doing it in my second project. There is a lot of the language of the second project, which is a magical realism Western. The language is very different than the language I use in Mona because it's also set in the 1890s and the 1960s. And so the language is more proprietary to like South Texas, Mexico, and just the kind of words that they would have used. I'm trying to think if I'm using different kinds of metaphors. I don't know. I think that just comes down to one of the characters is a bandito, and he just views the world the way a bandito would. And so I think like if he's using metaphors, it's more like, you know, like you see cattle, you take the cattle because it's there. Like, yeah, I'm not sure that I'm using proprietary language, specialized language in that instance. But yeah, it's now that we've been talking about it, I think it's definitely something that I do want to keep in mind in the future.
Great. So we have first of all, I'm so interested in you sold me already on your next novel. So I'm really
Oh,
looking
thank
forward
you.
to this already with Magical Realism Western. I am absolutely there. We had several good questions coming in on the chat, so I want to go to our chat window and our audience questions real quick. This is an interesting one to me. And how did you come to choose the form you did, the novel, for what you wanted to express to the world? That is, as opposed to short stories, stand-up, screenplay, etc. They asked because good comedy is not always found in novels, and there are definitely, this is a novel that has a lot of really solid one-liners in it along the way. So,
Thank you. Yeah, I originally conceived of this as a graphic novel. I mean, in the first kind of flash of inspiration, and then I remembered I don't draw, and I had actually never read a graphic novel, so that's like not a good idea. So I scrapped that, and then I did. I think originally conceive of it as a short story, but as I was thinking about the only thing I knew at the very outset actually was that Mona's a cutter, and that's not it's not a spoiler because that comes out in the first chapter. She engages in self harm, and using that as a jumping off point, I just had to ask myself repeatedly, why is she cutting? Why is she angry? Why? And the answers were getting so big, and her world was getting so big that I knew I couldn't fit that into a short story. Okay, so then I was like, all right, I have a novel. And the reason that I wrote it as a novel and not a screenplay is because the only writing class I took before I started this was a screenwriting class. And I had started several screenplays and didn't get anywhere, and they were too hard. And I was like, I'll do something easier. I'll write a novel. And like, uh, they're not easier. They're really hard also. And yeah, so I had already not finished several screenplays. So I was like, well, we'll see if I can finish a novel. And so that is how I arrived at that format.
hmm, that's interesting. I like the origin story there. And I will say, as someone who tried to write a screenplay in a class before, novels might be easier than screenplays, at least for my mind. So
They might be, yeah. I'm not sure. Now that I've written two novels, I don't know. I'm like, there's got to be something easier.
so another question from the chat. So in what category or genre did publishers identify your story? Like, how were they trying to categorize this novel as agents, as your agent shopped it around, and then maybe now as it's been going to actual publication?
Yeah, I think that they were pitching it as chick lit, and then I think they were trying to pitch it as YA because the protagonist is 23, and it really isn't either of those. And so I think that was probably standing in the way. And it's been promoted as a beach read and a summer read, and I have definitely seen pictures of people reading it on the beach. Although I'm not sure how beach ready it is. I don't know. I'm not a marketer. I'm a writer, but yeah, it goes dark. And so it just depends on what kind of beach vacation you want to have, I guess.
I mean, there's the sun on the cover, though.
Yeah, there's a sun on the cover for sure.
I mean, as long as you get sandy while you read it, it's a beach read. That's
Yeah,
the only qualification. So
yeah.
the next question in the chat will relate to something you just said, which is, does having your master's in business inform your ideas about how to market a book? I guess, do you have any marketing experience, or do you have any thoughts on book marketing that are maybe contrary or opposed to the traditional book marketing wisdom?
Yeah, I don't know. I didn't know anything about book marketing before about a year ago. And I think I definitely don't think that the MBA has helped at all with anything really, other than like I can read The Economist now and I understand what they're saying. But I think that I'm not opposed to book marketing. I understand the necessity for it. I enjoy it. And um yeah, and I but I have heard a million writers say in these Q&As like, I hate, book promo. I hate the business side of it. I feel so sleazy. And I get that. I really it's a completely different uh it's a different energy. And actually while I'm doing book promo this month, I've been trying to work on revisions for my second book, and I actually physically can't. I can't make my brain pivot from marketing and the promo stuff into art, it's impossible. But if anything, like the business degree, I think did kind of set me up for like, you know, this money is what makes the world go around, and it's just it's a part of it. And and so understanding that, like I don't mind doing the buy my book dance.
It is absolutely the buy my book dance. And I mean, I work in marketing by day, so I absolutely understand the switch flip required to go between those two. If my brain is stuck in thinking about marketability, it's basically impossible to work on the creative side of things.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, so the next question from the chat, there were so many literary, historical, and art references in the book. What do you consume as far as reading to prepare for writing a novel?
Yeah, I read a lot. My second book, like I said, is a magical realism Western. So I've been reading a ton over the last 5 years. I've been reading Westerns, I've been reading the Latin American canon. I just bought on Monday, and I'm about 100 pages in, Love in the Time of Cholera, which I'd never read before, and it's really beautiful. Um, but it all feeds into it. Like, the I kind of had a realization in the middle of a book chat, like about a week or so ago. I think one of the biggest influences on Mona at Sea was actually this British TV show called Peep Show. I don't know if anybody's seen that show. It's incredible. I think it's on Netflix. Go find it and watch it because it's hilarious. I watched it for the first time around 2012-ish, and and then I watched it again all the way through during the pandemic. And I'm sitting there watching it and I'm like, oh my God, like Mona's voice, a lot of it I think comes from that TV show. She even has a line in the book where she says, well, they never should have gone to the Euro, should they? And I swear, like that's straight from this British TV show. There's this one character, Mark, who's always having these one-off lines like that. And yeah, I just think I'm like a big filter feeder, and like that's all celebrity gossip and TV and like fine literature and my BA in art history, and yeah.
Have you read How Much of These Hills is Gold by C. Pam John?
No, not yet. I really want to.
Yeah, it's really great and beautifully written, and it's not, I mean, it has some touches of, I guess there are full-on magical realist moments in it, and it's not a genre Western in the sense of like full-on Western, but it's set in that period, and there's definitely elements that creep in from those kind of things. So a really great book that I recommend as well as your book.
Thank you.
So there was a practical question, a practical author question. Do you have a website or other platforms, I guess digital platforms, that you utilize?
Yes, I have a website, elizabethgonzalezjames.com, and I am on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. And I'll put my handle in the chat.
Oh, thank you. And if you join Twitter, you can join the rest of the literary world in the current discourse about Cat Story, or Cat Person, pardon me.
Oh my gosh, Cat Person.
Don't do it though. Don't join that discourse. Nothing good comes from it. Never join the discourse. That's the new rule of being a writer.
Just eat your popcorn from the sidelines like I do.
Exactly. My next set of questions was about building characters and creating drama, because those two sort of, I mean, all these things go hand in hand, but those two, I think, in your novel go hand in hand pretty closely. One of the old writing adages is let your characters make mistakes or force them into mistakes. Restraint isn't always one of Mona's strong suits, so we get some excellent dramatic moments from this. I want to start with the character side of things. First, what's your relationship with your characters? Do you live with them as friends, observe them from afar, occupy their minds yourself, and really try to write as them? What's your sort of approach to how Mona came to be?
It's different for every character. Like I said, Mona is a little bit based on me. And so, yeah, I think whether I wanted to or not, I was living with her inside of me. Other stuff that I've written I've not been as close to the character in that I felt them inside of me. Other characters, I think I just kind of feel like they're ghosts walking around whispering at me, and I'm like, okay, I want to do right by you, so you just got to tell me what do you want me to do here? Yeah, and I put her into a lot of really uncomfortable situations, and she does not. She does very poorly in them, in many circumstances. And I think of it um, like rocks, how they press down on on carbon to create a diamond. Is that how diamonds are made? I don't know. I keep using this metaphor, and it's on Zoom, so nobody actually ever corrects me. I'm just gonna say that like confidently, like I know what I'm talking about. Uh,
That is 100% accurate. You're
okay,
perfectly accurate. Yeah.
okay, thank you. Yes. So yeah, so I see the situations. You know, she's unemployed, she's cutting, she has a drinking problem. Her parents' marriage is not going great. She you know, has a kind of contentious relationship with her brother, a different kind of contentious relationship with her sister. She hates Tucson. She has never had a boyfriend. And all of these things just like squeeze down on her and make her um react and make her into who she is. And they force her to do this on the page.
Mhm. So is that something, is that method, the diamond method, is that something that you, is that something specific to Mona, or is that a technique now you sort of recognize as creating characters who are going to be prone to mistakes by putting them in situations where mistakes are going to happen, where they're sort of beyond them?
It was definitely a technique I utilized in Mona, and I'm not sure if I've utilized it in my other work. The second novel is still so much very much in flux that I would love to think about it though in those terms, because I'm just not sure. But definitely with Mona, there's one scene where uh she's kind of trapped in a small space with another person, and they literally start kicking each other under the table. And that kind of and that was a situation where, you know, I physically trapped her in a close space with somebody, and just to see like what is she going to do. And yeah, I think just putting that kind of pressure on the characters, it also creates movement. They're just constantly doing something.
So this is also a coming of age and a redemption story. So while she is a character with flaws making mistakes, um, were you conscious of not pushing Mona into the territory where she might become irredeemable? And I also feel like maybe too that relates to people toning down maybe her tone, saying,
Mhm.
you know, tone her down some. Is that something you were? Is there such a thing as irredeemable territory that a character can go into? And is that something you were conscious of as you were writing this character?
Yeah, for sure there are irredeemable characters. I mean, the first one who comes to mind is Judge Holden from Blood Meridian, right?
Mhm.
Um, and I I think that when I first started writing the book, this was also around the same time as the whole debate about unlikable female characters was really heating up. And I love unlikable female characters. I love unlikable characters. If somebody is like despicable, I want to read that book. I That's just my taste. I don't want to be friends with book characters. I have no interest in that. Um, and so I was totally fine to make her uh spoiled, entitled, mouthy, unpleasant, you know, all of the stuff. Um, and yeah, I think in early days, I was probably pushing her towards being irredeemable, and then I realized like readers just don't really want to read that, and um, I didn't have the talent to pull it off, honestly either. I think that somebody can write that book, but it wasn't me at the time. Maybe it'll be me someday. I don't know. I don't know. I don't want to say like characters have to be redeemed, because I don't know that I believe that. But
Mhm.
it wasn't right for the story, and it wasn't right at the time that I was writing it.
Nice. So we had a related question in the chat. So you mentioned that several people asked you to take it down a notch, and a two-part question. The first part being, is there anything that got squeezed out that you wish were still in? Something that you cut that you sort of regret that you cut? Maybe you would have stuck to your guns had you given it a couple more thoughts.
No, everything that got cut absolutely needed to be cut. I mean, the um I uh there was a lot of sophomoric stuff in the early drafts. I had 100 pages of backstory. I had this whole digression into the melamine poisoning scandal in China in 2008. I had one entire chapter where Mona learns how to knit. No, it was all junk, and it all needed to go. So I have no regrets. And toning her down, I I think I couldn't see it necessarily because I was too close to it, but I was willing to trust what other people were saying. And according to some Goodreads reviewers, I think that some people still consider her a little too edgy. So it's just a matter of taste.
Mhm. Yeah, matter of taste. Good art has people who don't like it. So, um, uh, did you have any, was there any resentment, or this is part two of the question from the chat, is there any resentment about people telling you to tone it down? And if so, how did you move through that? And I might add, just broadly, how do you handle criticism as a writer in a productive way?
No, I don't think I had any resentment. Like I said, this was the first thing I ever wrote. This was my first book. I didn't know anything. And so I'm willing to trust when people are telling me. And when it's also like pretty near universal, like, yeah, I don't have a big ego. I will completely listen to that and take it to heart. I also it helps uh um I live in Oakland, and I went to go see Josh Moore, um, who's a brilliant writer from San Francisco. He was on book tour for a book called All This Life, and he told a story where he submitted the manuscript to his agent, and his agent said, "It's great, but I can't publish it the way it is. It's too angry, and you need to completely change the tone." And he wrestled with it because he was really happy with how the book had turned out. And he was like, well, do I want to rethink this, or do I want to stick to my guns? And he decided to listen to his agent, and he changed the entire tone of the book. And so I had just gotten the same feedback from my agent, and so I I reached out to him, and we did like a Skype chat, and he kind of talked me through his process. And I think it was just looking at word choice. Like every time I had a negative word, he was like, flag it and see if you can think of a better word to use that isn't so negative. And so I was like, well, I know nothing, and he's published like 5 books, and he's doing the same thing. So clearly, like, it was fine. And how do I handle criticism? You For one thing, I don't read reviews. So I mentioned a few Goodreads reviewers. I have looked at Goodreads a few times, but I generally don't look. And I don't want to know, because if somebody is like, she's a no talent hack, I will ignore all the nice things that people said, and I will only remember she's a no talent hack. So I don't even look. My writers group, I trust them so much that, if they're like, it's not good, I'll be sad, and then I'll be like, it's not good. I got to work on it. So it all just depends on criticism. If it comes from friends and people who care about you, you really need to listen. Be hurt, that's fine, but you still have to listen.
I resent all criticism for 30 to 40 seconds.
Hmm.
Then I put my head in the right spot to accept it. But yeah.
Yeah, totally. Yeah.
Um, so back to character for a second. What makes a character interesting to write for you? Who does the character need to be to get you to spend a few hundred pages or more through drafts and revision writing that character?
I am drawn to weirdos and people who just have really weird obsessions and who are into some pretty disturbing stuff. I don't know. Again, that's just my taste level. I have a dark sense of humor. I'm like screwed up, and that's just what I like. I'm trying to think about. I have this short story collection too that I haven't finished writing, but I have a lot of the stories like kind of planned in my head, and I'm also into people who are on the outside, I think, looking in, people who feel like they don't belong. And so any situation where a character feels like they're in a room with people but they're alone, I don't know. Yeah, I like isolated people too. So, yeah.
Yes. Is there anything through all these processes of revision and through writing and through a couple books and stories now, that anything you've learned about creating characters that you really wish someone had just told you right off the bat?
Yeah, I um I remember I went to this writers workshop in California called Lit Camp. And if anybody's in California, it's a great workshop to go to. And Paul Harding was there, and I asked him a question. What do you do when a character is stuck? Or no, what do you do when you're stuck as a writer? And he's like, I will just address it to the text. Why why is uh why is Shauna over there in the corner crying? Like he was like, just literally write it in the book or have a character say that, and then have them talk about it or but I think that being able to interrogate the text was something that had never occurred to me until I heard him say that. And by that point, Mona was already in a drawer. But yeah, I wish that I had known that that was something that you could do. I just thought you had to like sit there and just bash your head against the keyboard until you had the right thought, and then you could type it out. But but having the freedom to actually ask the book, like, what is going on here? Um, that was really cool, and I'd never heard anybody say that before.
That's great. Well, I think we're up to the last question at this point, so I'm going to pose it to you. This is the last question we try to ask all of our guests. What's one piece of writing advice you'd give to an author just starting out?
Yeah, my favorite piece of writing advice is an oldie but a goodie, and it's from Henry James, and it's paraphrased, but try to be a person upon whom nothing is lost. And I love that. I try to live that way as a writer, but I also try to live that way as a person. I try to move through the world with all five senses open and just taking in everything. Uh, how the air in the room feels on my skin, how the nachos taste, what the elevator music sounds like, whatever it is. But I also take that to mean moving through the world with your heart open as well. And I try to look at people that I encounter in my life without judgment and try to see how uh what piece what side of their story am I not seeing. And I don't know if that's what Henry James meant when he said that, but that's how I interpret it. I interpret it to mean like try to not lose any side of the story. Try to see when that mom is screaming at her kid and you're like, oh, what a crappy parent, leave the kid alone. What piece of that story am I not seeing? How can I open my heart to experience her in a way that isn't judgmental, and then put that into my writing. So
That's
yeah.
wonderful.
Thank
That's
you.
wonderful.
Thank you.
Elizabeth, thank you so much for joining us. Everyone else, please go buy a copy of the book if you don't have it already. The link's been put back into the chat window. So Elizabeth, thank you so much for joining us. This has been an excellent chat. I've learned something, and I hope everyone else here has too.
Thank you so much, and thank you for having me.
Have a good night, everybody.